Hey everyone, today's build is going to be a paludarium using this ZooMed Repti habitat. Now since I'm building a paludarium and there's going to be a water feature in it, I need a filtration system. So in order to accomplish this, I'm going to build what's very similar to a sump you'll find in some larger aquariums. The material I'm using here is 24 inch by 24 inch quarter inch PVC board. Now this PVC board is relatively easy to work with. All you need to do is mark your line, score it, and it makes a nice clean snap. Once I had all my pieces cut out and ready to go, I used a hot glue gun to hold the pieces in place. As most of you probably know, this glue does not hold up well to water, so once I had everything in place and the glue hardened up, I went around with some aquarium grade silicone and sealed everything up to hold it in place. For the inlet into the pump area, I just used this knitting mesh and glued it and then siliconed it in place. In hindsight, I probably could have made this a little bigger, but you'll see why I kind of made it just in this one area later on. A few hours later, after the silicone had become tack-free, I went and placed beads of silicone along all the edges that were going to come in contact with the glass. Once I had the filter box in place, I went and took some blue painter's tape just to hold everything in place until the silicone cured. Because the water area was going to be relatively small, I did not want water in other areas where it would not get drawn in by the pump and go stagnant, so I placed these 2-inch thick pieces of XPS foam board down. And the area that the water feature is going to be in, I placed a piece of foam sheet down just to protect the glass from the rocks. The stone I'm using in this build is called blue slate stone. Now the stone doesn't look very blue right now, but once it gets wet, the color really comes out and it gets a lot of texture to it. To build up the waterfall here, I'm using a piece of Malaysian driftwood that just happened to fit very well between these two rocks. To seal up all these cracks, I'm just putting in some silicone and then I will cover it with some coco coir. And to make sure that the water flows over the feature and not run behind it, it's a good idea to seal up any of those areas that you might find before you start adding more layers on top. The foam piece I'm putting here is just to help support the next layer and really isn't going to play any part in filtration. Now since I'm going to put a rock on top of here, I didn't want it pressing up against the glass, so I put another piece of foam down. Once I have a piece in place, I like to lock it all in with some silicone and coco coir. This again helps to make sure that you have water flowing over your feature and not behind it. The look I'm trying to go for with this water feature is like a little spring that comes out of the side of the hill, exposing roots and rocks as it trickles out. To fill in any big gaps or voids, I just squeeze in some scrap pieces of filter foam and then silicone over it and cover it with coco coir. I had originally planned on leaving that space open just as like a little cave with water trickling over it, but there were just too many passageways for a frog to get stuck. At this point I was debating on how high I actually wanted the waterfall to go, so I just let things cure for a bit and worked on the other end of the paludarium. Now, just like in the previous video, when attaching the hardscape to the sides, I used hot glue to hold them in place and then silicone and cocoa core to permanently attach them. After thinking on it for a little while and then remembering that the filter setup really won't allow me to take the waterfall up too high, I decided I would just stop where it was and go ahead and cut the opening for the water to exit. Now this rock fits perfectly here. It's nice and snug in place and it won't obstruct any water from coming out. Once that final piece of the waterfall was in place, I decided to go back over and keep putting on more hardscape. The more I use these carbonized cork panels, the more I enjoy working with them. There really isn't any unusable scrap pieces left over when you're working with them, and it just takes a little bit of trimming to get them to fit together like a jigsaw puzzle. The gaps and differences in height also make for a really naturalistic looking background, as well as making nice areas to plant moss or to root epiphytes or vines. Now with this last piece of hardscape siliconed in, I'm going to let the paludarium sit for a week and let the silicone fully cure. After the paludarium had cured for a week, I took the hose and sprayed everything down really well. I also took this opportunity to test out the pump and the waterfall. Unfortunately, as you can see here, the pump really wasn't strong enough to give the flow I was looking for, so it was off to Amazon to order a new one. While I was waiting for the pump to arrive, I decided to continue on with the water feature area. The substrate I'm using here is called Midnight River from Carib Sea. It's a really nice color match for the stone I'm using, and it's a large enough grain where it will not impede the water to a point where it won't be able to flow to the pump. To create the slope coming up out of the water, I placed down the flatter stones that I had, backfilled with the gravel here, and then placed another stone on top. This last stone here will make a nice break between the water and the land area. Now here I probably should have made the foam a little closer to the glass so I didn't have to use as much stone. While I had the gravel out, I made sure that I filled in any areas I thought frogs might be able to get behind or get stuck. It's also going to be a good planting area for a specific plant I had in mind that's found a lot in aquariums, but also has some really nice emergent growth. This filter foam is what the plants are going to go into and the leaves will rest on. This is a really bad angle into the filter, but here's the foam that's going to filter out the large particles, and this is the biomedia area. But as you can see here, the water's flowing out pretty nice through the biomedia and then down and out through to the waterfall. Now with the filter all set up, it was time to just wait and let the water cycle just like in an aquarium and go ahead and prep for planting. The first thing I did was go around with some wet sphagnum and wedge them into the cracks so I could plant the moss around the water feature. The moss I went with for this build is Christmas moss. Not only does it grow well in aquariums, but it also has nice terrestrial growth. I also decided to use it in some transition areas between the water and the land, as well as other areas of the paludarium. Now the first plant I'm using here is a sword plant called Echinodoros rainey. I'm not sure how it's going to grow out of the water, but in the water it has some nice deep red leaves. And here we have another sword plant called Echinodorus aflame. Just like the other one, I'm not sure how large it will grow immersed, but I guess I'll find out soon enough. Next up we have a micro sword. This is going to grow a really nice carpet. It spreads by runners, as you can tell by me pulling it apart. It's also going to go in the transition area. It should spread nicely both in the water and up onto the land. Now this plant here is Starogene repens Portoveo. Now, according to the seller, this plant only grows to about 2 to 6 inches tall, and as you can see with all the roots coming out of it, it's going to spread out nicely, I hope, and make a really nice transition more into the land area. Now always remember to stop once in a while and mist down these plants, especially ones that require high humidity. At the last minute here I decided to put this stone in. I think it'll look nice, more of a river's edge kind of look going on here now. Just a little more gravel and stone, mainly to hide the edge of the filter mat here. As well as one last stone in the water feature. Now this next plant is Philodendron mini, and planting it in the foam is really quite easy. You just cut a slit in it and place the roots in the slit. I have quite a bit of this stuff, so I'm just trying to thin out my stockpile a little bit. Nice sprig of Solanum Ecuador. And of course a few random bromeliads. Some Peperomia glabella right next to some Pilea dark mystery. The Fluval stratum probably isn't that necessary. I just wanted to give the plant some extra nutrients. Plus it's not going to break down like a normal ABG mix would. This one's a bit of a tongue twister here. It's Procris repens pulchra. This plant should look really nice once it starts to really kick off its growing. And now that the planting's done, I'm going to go ahead and start putting down my leaf litter. Since I had quite a bit of the Christmas moss left, I decided I'd put it around the rocks here and maybe get some growth over top of the rock. The background was looking a little bare, so I decided to add some larger leaf plants here. So this is Monstera celtipicana. And of course can't forget the cleanup crew, some dwarf whites, and the springtails. I recently bought 6 of these clay cultures, and I'm glad I did because now I have just an abundance of springtails. Now I'm going to go ahead and add in some botanicals. I really like the look of these monkey pods. They take a long time to break down, and they're also really good bowls for dumping your fruit flies into for your frogs. And last but not least, top off with some magnolia leaves. I did add one more plant in later on that I discovered in one of my bins, but I know it also looks a little sparse, but I think part of the fun of building these is just watching everything grow in over time. About a month and a half later, and everything is actually taken off. Everything's rooted. No plants melted or died, so I would have to call that a success. The aquatic plants really haven't showed a lot of upward growth, but they have put out a lot of new leaves and they are starting to spread. This is the one plant I added called partridge berry. It's actually a North American native. And you can see the roots starting to spread out. Moss is growing in and the water's nice and clean. And of course, whenever you plant aquatic plants, you get hitchhikers. And now, without further ado, the frogs. Epipedobates Tricolor Moraspunga. These frogs' natural habitat is mostly around streams. If you've seen the tadpoles, they differ quite a bit from other dark frog tadpoles. When you see most typical dark frog tadpoles, they're usually pretty dark colored, and that's just to camouflage them in the really tannin-rich waters that they're normally deposited in. But these tadpoles are super fast, and they have a really light tan molted color to them. And after watching them in their grow-out tank, they seem to have the ability, kind of like Edelupus tadpoles, to latch onto objects to hold on in currents. Not really sure about that, but that was just a brief observation that I made. Unfortunately, I did have 5 tadpoles, but these guys transitioned out and were in a grow-out bin, but the other 3 were very close to transitioning out of the water. It just so happened that that was also the time where we had temperatures that were about 15 or so degrees below zero, and the space heater in the room I had them in just couldn't keep up, so they perished. Now the only upside, I guess, maybe to this is that now I'm going to head to Tinley Park, and hopefully someone there might have these available. But for now, these 2 frogs have a 40-gallon tank all to themselves. And if you made it this far, thanks for watching. If you haven't already, please like and subscribe. And until the next video, that's a wrap.